welcome to part two of the post-election analysis. I am again joined by the students of the University of the Gambia who will help me to go through some of the topics that are prepared for this edition of the analysis. So I would have to ask them to introduce themselves to the wider viewers. You're welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Kingsley Olatunde. I'm a sixth-year medical student from the University of the Gambia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cham. My name is Siman Lowe, a political science student in my third year, and also the information minister of the UTG Students Union. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so very much, gentlemen. Let us look at the university in this context. When the election was fast approaching, how was the lectures like within the university compared to as the election was fast approaching? There is this anxiety of whether the Gambia is going to witness a peaceful election or not. How was it look like?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Elections, in most cases in Africa here, to the Gambia in particular, always have a looming factor to the citizens at large. However, to us as students of the university, days or months ahead of the election, students are also aware that there will be certain issues that might also be an impediment to our lectures at large. For instance, like during the campaign period, we have a time whereby some lecturers would have to cancel their class because they will not have the time for students to also have that transport means to be able to go to classes. So this also was a factor that was at least an impediment to the progress of students at large. However, like also going towards the election day, we also realized that there is a need for students to travel back to their villages in case they're traveling, so as to be given the chance to also vote. So there was at least a close of a few days where students can go to their villages and to their towns and be able to cast their votes in as much as the election is concerned.
Election was slated for Saturday, and we've got the information that the university was to sit exams or you are on a revision on a Friday. How was the general feeling when your lecturers, inform you that the exams or lectures was not going to be proceeded on Friday?
Well, I guess most students understood the fact that exams were about to be held, and quite a few of them, like Mr. Siman rightly mentioned, had to go to their hometowns to vote. So the break was quite welcomed by the students. We didn't have that much problem with it, and after the break, we were able to pick up with our lectures and exams without much problems.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Siman. What was the mood within the university during the height of the political engagement in this country?
Yes. Thank you so much. I would say the students of the university are students who are exposed to the political climate of this country, because we are also exposed to the UTG political landscape, while students are always exposed to the issue of political parties going up and down, having their campaign promises. So the issue of the elections we had recently was not new to the UTG students, because they have been exposed to all those type of political issues. However, also, it was at some point a bit competitive, because amongst more than 6,000 students, there was also that differences in the political opinions of those particular people. Some might be there to support different political parties, and then they also tend to have that sense of like trying to promote the agendas of their political parties. So the mood itself was very friendly, because students are exposed to diversity. They're exposed to at least being understanding each other's opinions, likewise trying to understand that there will be political differences. So the mood was calm, the mood was peaceful, and they were also able to promote the agenda of their political parties at the university at large.
This issue of being divided politically, during the height of the political tension, during the campaign period, how does this impact the lectures, or how does this impact the atmosphere within the University of the Gambia?
Again, students are wise enough to understand that they should not allow the electoral process, the national electoral process, to affect their studies. So classes were in no way impeded by the onset of the elections or the impending elections. What you had instead was more, an amicable atmosphere where students will sit down and discuss at length the pros and cons of their political parties, point out the strengths of their political parties and the weaknesses of the opposing parties. So you had that amicable atmosphere there. I've witnessed quite a few tense arguments, really, really tense ones. But then at the end of the day, they were just arguments. So there was no violence over it. At the end of the day, we all understood that we should accept each other's differences and then vote for the parties we supported.
What would you have identified from the area of the management as the weak side or as their weak end during the course of the political process? And we could have been positioned better to, to at least, improve performance within the university.
Yes. I wouldn't say there are weaknesses on the side of the management with regards to this election process. For the fact that students were not controlled as to how they look into their political beliefs. And again, there was a time frame where students were allowed to go and vote, cast their votes. So to me, the weakness wasn't to the side of the management. One can say that in as much as academics is concerned, when politics are also looming, there is a need for us to have a time frame. Because the campaign period was a time whereby students are supposed to go for their classes. And then going through the ordeals of the transport system we have in the country here, students will sometimes have to close from class around 7 o'clock in the evening. And they may have to walk going back to their compound because it is always a difficult time to have a vehicle. So one can say the weakness would have been that there could have been a transport provided for students when they closed from lectures, because it was camping period, to be able to at least transport back home without any much ordeals. But then apart from the use of the transportation, some lecturers also have so much understanding to the extent of trying to cancel their classes for students to also stay at home in order to not go through those particular ordeals. So to me, the weaknesses weren't much. It was just only the camping period when students were almost going through those ordeals of looking for transport, going to the campus, coming back home, closing late. This became at least a bit difficult to them.
How would you describe the quality of the political leadership, ranging from individual political, from the leadership from the individual political parties, from your own point of view? We have the Gambians are presented with, different flag bearers or standard bearers, that came to say, I'm going to vie for presidency. How would you, describe, or how would you put in your own way, by percentage, their qualities, looking at the caliber of candidates that were presented?
It will be very difficult to quantify or qualify the candidates based on there are other questions you still have to ask, like what are the parameters that we are using to judge all the candidates? Are we talking about their experience? If it's by experience, we know that certain people have already served in government, and with that in mind, they have a stronger edge over their opponents. If you're talking about education, that's a whole other angle. Of course, some of our candidates are way more educated than others. So that's why I said that when you're talking about qualifying the leaders, we have to set down parameters first so we know what we're qualifying them on. And then I can then tell you what my opinion is on who is more qualified than the other.
Your own view?
Yes.
From his point of view? That we look at the academic qualifications, we look at their experience in the political cycle.
Yes.
How would you position that?
Yes, there are different angles that people use when they want to judge who should be a leader for a particular country. I'll always say that leaders are supposed to be experienced. But again, despite the experience, there is also a need for you to have that sense of being able to influence people. Because once you become a leader, people are to look upon you. And you being able to influence them also will serve as a means to at least promote development. So as he said, there are many different angles we have to consider. One may go through their manifestos and see which one stands out for the Gambian people. One again may look at their ethics. How do they work with Gambian people? What efforts have they made towards the development of our country at large? So these are things that we may have to look at to decide who shall be or who could have been our president. But then from my perspective also, after I've looked at all of them, I was able to come to a conclusion of whom I believe was able to handle the system of the country here at large.
And could you please share your own view on your own personal candidate that you have eyed to be the most qualified? Who?
Yes, so as a political science student, I had to look into some of their policies. And I will not say I've looked at all the policies because some of them weren't available for the citizens to also see. But then I can say I've gone through policies of the UDP, I've gone through the policies of DOI, and I've also gone through the policy of CA, but unfortunately, they weren't contesting. But then I've also had a slight look at the policies of Esambaifal as an independent candidate. So after looking at all of them, looking at my political lens as a person, I concluded that I will vote for somebody who's going to at least save the Gambia from the circles of poverty and in the samples of underdevelopment. I also looked at somebody I believe have been there to serve the country, was able to at least promote the agenda of the young people at large. And from that, I was not to say that I put my vote for this particular guy, but then I believe that Honorable Halifa Sallah was convincing to me to become the president of this particular country at large.
How would you predict the political climate in terms of tolerance in this country in the distant near future? Would you say we have established a country, or we have created a political climate that is going to be very welcoming and accept the different political ideologies of others, or you think that we will still remain being divided along the way?
I would say that we've come a long way already as a country, and we are now more tolerant of each other's views than we were before. But then there's still a ways to go before we can say that Gambia is very, very tolerant of different political views. Currently, these current elections were pretty tolerant, but then we've seen how, I believe the problem is not the tolerance of political views, it's the outcome of the elections now. Losing is not a very, very good, how would I say it? It's not a good outcome for any supporter, and not many people will be happy losing, especially at national election levels. So I believe we need to get to the point as a nation where we can accept our losses and accept the votes of the majority and then move forward from that. The problem is not our tolerance of each other. We're able to tolerate each other's views, tolerate each other's political differences. What we need to learn to tolerate now is the idea that despite us thinking that our party is the best and our leader is the best, there's an option of losing. And if we're ever faced with that, we need to accept it and accept the vote of the majority.
Do you hold a different view from him in terms of political climate? I mean, would one say the recent past, that we've all seen Gambia has went through a different political engagement, and we are at a certain point heavily divided along the way due to the fact that we have a different political ideologies. How would you rate in terms of tolerating each other's political ideologies?
Yes, I think this is a very important question to be answered. Going back to history, one can say since the time of President Jawara, the former president of the Gambia, in our first republic, coming down to our recent election here, Gambians have been tolerant to each other. It is normal for you to have different opinions in political ideologies. It is normal for you to decide based on different factors. It is normal to have a push and pull in election time. What is not normal is at least to use harsh words, to use words of hatred to people that you also share different opinions with. So going back to history, from the times of Sadiq Jawara, coming down to 2016, we've realized that elections had been peaceful. Gambians were able to tolerate each other because we have that sense of social connections that we've always had. So to me, our political tolerance had been there. It is still there. We might have some conflictual times in our political history, but that wouldn't also determine that we are not also trying to take each other's opinions when it comes to political beliefs. So I always tell people that despite all the political brouhaha that we have in the country, it is still us as citizens. We live together, we eat together, we work together. And then we can accept each other's opinions unless and until there are times when we have different opinions. That at the end we tend to also acculturate with it and then life moves on.
Many predicts have indicated that the Gambia government or Gambian people have not gone through a very intense civic education to ensure that we have a very peaceful elections, and that will also promote political tolerance. What is your view on this?
I would agree. I can say from personal experience, I never did civics as a course, both in junior school, high school, even at university level. Everything I know about politics and economics as topics, I learned on my own. I studied on my own. So our educational system needs to learn to include civics across all branches, be it science, arts, or commerce. It should be involved so that students can learn before time, before they get exposed to the political atmosphere. They can learn about the country. They can learn to make their own informed decisions about leadership.
Some predicted that the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education is about to integrate a civic education into their main curriculum. Yeah. Do you think this will have an impact positively on the lives of the Gambian people in looking at our political situation?
Yes, obviously, yes. I think it will have an impact into the lives of Gambian people. In fact, it is not about to be, but it has already been integrated in the system. I remember this year, those in grade 10 are also doing civics education. being in the science field, the arts, or the commerce field, but it is seen as a core subject. So it might have been seen to be a bit late, but then I think they've been able to also look at the culture of the country and adapt to it. So to me, civics will at least be able to help students to know their fundamental human rights, to know their duties, and also to build a sense of patriotism and nationalism towards the country's development. So I've always been an advocate that there has to be a need to sensitize people towards elections and towards politics. But then civics now being into the system would at least serve as an edge to help us in trying to mitigate the sense of political ignorance and also the absence of citizens towards political awareness at large.
What would you say we have learned from the recently concluded elections? Gambia went through. What lesson do you think Gambians have learned from the election?
Oh, well, I think I'll have to think on that question.
Okay, so that question go back to the political science students.
Yes, there are lessons that we learned from our previous elections. But then before talking about the lessons, there is need for us to go back on a memory lane and look at our pre-election time going towards the election day and up to also the post-election time. Now, in the pre-election time, we have seen that CSOs, the independent, the IEC, were able to at least go outside the country, go to Africa and try to at least sensitize people, tell them their rights and how best can they promote peaceful elections. For instance, in our school level at SOSA, the School of Arts and Sciences, we had a nationwide tour where we tried to promote the content of peace and cohesion. So we can tend to realize that citizens had been made aware of what they could do to at least safeguard the interests of this nation. So if you go back to asking the lessons that we have learned, I think one lesson is that a country where there is peace and there is tolerance, that people accept each other's diversity, then there is a sense of promoting development at large. But then if you go back to the post-election time, you realize that prior to the elections being announced, the results being announced, some political party leaders also went and rejected the particular results. Then we have seen the reaction people have had towards that rejection. So that also could tell us that it is always not good to preempt election results because it is going to fuel some sort of conflict. So to me, I think the best lesson that we have learned is that the most essential part of election is to maintain peaceful and also to promote the ideals of the particular peacefulness.
He has just mentioned that before the elections, before IEC could officially come out to pronounce the final election results, some political leaders have started jubilating, and others, rejected the election. Do you think this can compromise heavily the national security?
Actually, no. I believe it's more our perception of what is going on than the impact it actually has. Now, first of all, about political leaders celebrating results before results were officially announced. Now, every political party had agents that were at each poll. So I believe those agents were feeding them information about the results before the IEC had compiled it to then send their official statement. So leaders at the point already knew what the results were going to be way before the IEC announced it. Now, as for the issue of, rejecting the results before the IEC mentioned, okay, you will say that is wrong, that they should have waited for an official statement before rejecting the results. But again, them rejecting the results is not wrong. It's not inherently wrong. It is their right to exercise. They can exercise their right by rejecting the results. Now, if they reject the results, the next step is to take it to court. Now, our question should be not what right do they have to reject the results, but then why are they rejecting it? What proof do they have that there was electoral malpractice? Now, if there was electoral malpractice, then of course the court will rule that we should have a re-election. But if there isn't, it still doesn't take anything away from them. They can still exercise their rights and understand that yes, the courts have ruled that these elections have been just, and you have no grounds to reject the elections. So yeah.
Do you think that all these political activities could still compromise heavily could jeopardize national security?
Obviously, yes, I will agree. In fact, one of the points that he raised, I think I will have to go against that particular statement, that the rejection being done prior to the IEC giving us the results was actually not normal to me, because it would have also fueled a different conflictual part. In fact, it has already done so. I mean, they have a right to reject the results, but then there's also a process that they have to follow that they could have used. So trying to preempt the elections when we had 3 more areas still left, that to me would have been like done on the assertiveness of trying to promote the instability of this particular country. And in fact, you realize that those who are even into it at the end also withdrew. And then they had to apologize to their participants, to their supporters, that they had made a mistake. Because I remember seeing Marie Sok apologize to the Gambian people. I also remember Asa Fall on his Facebook page also doing the same thing. So that tells us that they had made a mistake. And they have realized at the very latter part of it that they tend to also go through. So I would say that elections in African politics, in West Africa at large, has always been an impediment to our progress as a country. It has always affected our security. And that is why this year's election, we first have to comment our securities. Because any poll that you go, there are always securities available. I was an observer for Gambia participate. I've seen how they were able to at least leave people amicably, support them towards casting their vote. But then we tend to realize one thing, that in as much as we want to maintain the peace of this country, that peace must start within us as citizens. And then that is why there's need for us to at least safeguard the interests of our nation when it comes to security at large.
Will you give credence to people that says Gambians were heavily divided, due to this situation, due to what he has just described? Some says, okay, the election results, should have been waited, before the oppositions or before the incumbent, because Adam Barrow and his team could jubilate. And then others says, okay, it is right for the opposition to also reject due to the fact that the election results, the announcement got delayed a little longer, almost about 48 hours after the closure of polls. Do you think that Gambians are divided along this way?
I would say that there was a modicum of division as a result of the things that you've just mentioned. But then that division is not grounds for violence. You understand? It's not grounds for us to, fight amongst ourselves. We have our own personal beliefs. Quite a few people believed that the elections were unfair. Quite a few people believed that there was malpractice there. But then everybody that believed such had no grounds, like they had no proof to bring forward. They had no evidence to bring forward. So it was just their personal opinions at the end of the day. As for the jubilation and the celebration that was mentioned, we know how human beings generally are. When we perceive victories, we are very, very eager to celebrate. And you cannot fault NPP supporters for taking to the streets and celebrating results they had heard before official announcement. Now, as for IEC being delayed in the official announcement, again, the general public would not have known the results if not for the political and the individual agents that were at the polls. Now, the agents were needed at the polls for there to move forward transparency of the elections, to minimize malpractice. So you could call them a necessary evil at the end of the day. But then I would not say that the supporters of NPP were in any way at fault for celebrating perceived victories, which turned out to be true.
We received a report during the day of the elections to say some polling stations, are without the other political parties have not representations, within the polling stations. What is your take on this? What is the role of the polling stations? And do you think that their presence, their presence within the polling stations is a contributing factor to, to deny the electoral results being rejected?
Yes. We need to understand the fact that there are different stakeholders involved when it comes to elections. Those parties that fail to have polling agents in those particular polls, it is not to the extent that the IC failed to ask them to also do so. It was at their own discredit not to have those polling agents there. I was at a polling station in Gensanjal where we had all parties their agents except that of Esambe Fall and also NUP. So to me, the IC has opened that door for them to send their polling agents. Now once they fail to do so, that does not have to discredit the elections itself at large. Because there are election observers over there. We have domestic observers as well as EU observers in almost all the polls. So they are there to observe the manner in which the election process is also done. So to me, that has nothing to do with the issue of the results of the elections. Because they're given the latitude to have the people there. So once they fail to do so, you cannot discredit the election because they fail to do their duties as political parties.
In this recently concluded election or the political process, do you think that women are given enough right or chance to participate, to express their political views?
Of course. Of course. I have personally seen many women go to the polls and vote. And quite a few of them were very, very proud to, state their political inclinations, post pictures about it all over social media. So it was very, very well tolerated within the grounds of the Gambia. So I would say that women are supported in their political views. Nobody is forcing women to, stick to a particular political view. They are allowed to make their individual decisions. And that is a very, very good process to have here in the Gambian electoral process.
What is the importance of women participation in politics generally?
The importance of women participation cannot be overemphasized. If you look at the Gambia at large, you realize that our population itself is dominantly that of women. If you look, remove the domination of the youth itself. But you realize that the youth or the women themselves are the ones that can also fuel development. They are the ones we have in our markets, going up and down. They are the ones who are also there to make sure that we're able to at least sustain our families at some point. So you tend to realize that their participation towards elections and politics itself cannot be overemphasized because their voice deserves to be heard. Presently, we have countries trying to promote women empowerment, and Gambia should not be an exception to that particular part. That is why this election was at least seen as a manifestation that women have stood out to let their voice be heard, just like the young people have also stood out to let their voice be heard in elections itself.
Looking at the manifesto or agenda of various political parties, that took part in this election, being a health student, in your own view, do you think the issues of health is effectively highlighted in their programs?
I looked at the manifestos of the UDP. I did not see that of NPP. But then I think I saw the manifesto of PDYS as well. And what they had in common was that they understood the importance of the health sector in the development of the Gambia. Now, they had plans of improving the health sector. But then, personally, I do not think they targeted the immediate problems of our health system. And one of those immediate problems would be, number one, the lack of space. Number two, unavailability of drugs within our hospitals. Now, I did not come across any point in the manifesto that was specifically targeted to those points. Of course, our president released a memo, I believe, last week about a medical facility that's been built somewhere along
in Farah.
Yes, Farah, so exactly. 1,500 bed facility, if I recall. And then there was a disclaimer against that on Twitter where someone mentioned that the biggest hospital in the West doesn't have up to 500 beds. So how does government wants to implement that here in the Gambia? Where are they going to find the resources for that? But then that is by the side. The important thing is, I do not believe that the issue of space within our hospitals is being well captured in the policies. And provision of drugs, again, is not well captured. Those are my personal opinions. Of course, they might have, avenues that they want to use to resolve these problems that they did not mention in their policies. But then, since it's not mentioned, I can't say much about that.
Do you believe Gambia has expressed political maturity enough, or you think there is need for improvement?
If I were to percentage the level of political maturity in the Gambia and the level of political immaturity, I would say there is a 60% maturity that we have showcased in this year's elections. And for the fact that during the campaign time, we have not seen Gambians having any conflictual parts in elections. We've seen parties having crisscrosses while they're going to do their campaign trails. But then we have not seen the campaign managers, or we have not seen the supporters trying to throw stones upon each other. So to me, there is a level of political maturity. We have seen our political leaders at some point going to a platform to argue based on policies, even though it was not all of them, but we've realized that that is also based on political maturity. We've seen supporters sitting with a guy who supports a different camp, but then trying to promote the ideas of your party. So that is a level of political maturity. So to me, yes, there was a sense of maturity, even though there is need to make people more aware of certain things that are also looming when it comes to elections at large.
Reports have emerged during the entire electoral process to say some political parties or militants of various political parties, have used their platforms to express hate speech, which we all know that can infiltrate violence in the country. What would you have to say to that?
Like Mr. Siman mentioned about political immaturity, I will classify that under that banner. Now, hate speech, tribalism, such claims have the potential to destabilize our national security. And that doesn't tell well for our population at large. Now, we are quite tolerant of each other. But then quite a few militants, like you mentioned, would use hate speech and tribalism as an agenda to push forward the policies of their parties or to convince people to vote for their parties. And to be honest, that doesn't tell well, like I previously mentioned. It is not right. We should not be using hate speech, tribalism to win supporters over to our cause. If we can't win them over based on logical arguments, then we do not deserve to have them on our side.
Do you think the use of hate speech on political platforms attributes to lack of, a civic education?
Yes, one can say it is under the lack of civic education, but again, one can also say that it is against the sense of responsibility that people also have as politicians. And this includes, or it goes even beyond just politicians, but even the media itself. Because we tend to realize that there are different factors responsible of trying to promote hate speeches. For instance, if a particular person goes to a media outlet, being a radio show or a TV show, that particular platform is not meant for you to instigate violence. It is not meant for you to expose Gambians to conflictual matters. I mean, if we've learned from history, let's say, for example, the history we have in Rwanda, the genocide itself. If you've looked at the recent history that we had in Guinea-Conakry, this at least should tell us as Gambians that hate speech is an enemy to our progress as a country. And any politician who does so just to garner votes from the citizens, I will call you as an irresponsible politician that needs not to be put into a public office. For if you do so, at the end, you're going to put the country into shambles, and that will result to conflict that we cannot prevent as a nation.
Young people constitute almost about 65% of the total population of this country. Going by the different policies, agenda, programs of various political parties, do you think youth problems have been effectively highlighted?
I would say yes to that question. Quite a few of the manifestos had the issues of youth unemployment as an agenda within their policies, and job creation and opportunity creation was a big part of the policies. It's one of the reasons why the youth flocked out in their numbers to go and vote at the polls, because they knew that their problems have been identified and solutions are being prepared to deal with those problems. So yes, I would say that the issues of the youth was well captured in the policies of the political parties.
Viewers, this is Alkali Cham, the host for the Road to State House. This is your part 2 of the post-election analysis. My guests are this gentleman from the University of the Gambia. Mr. Siman?
Yeah.
Mr. Siman, reports have emerged that children have been cited at various political rallies in this country during the political process. What's your view on this? Don't you think this is an exploitation on the side of the children being used as a political tool?
Yes, I will accept at some point that it could be seen as child exploitation in as much as they don't have adult suffrage to be given the chance to go and cast in their votes in elections. But again, with that, it becomes a bit complicated, because children are from compounds, they're from homes where they have parents who are there to at least safeguard the interests of those children. So if those particular parents are responsible to control the actions of their children, then there you cannot even blame a politician of that. Because you realize that the manner in which Gambians do politics, the ambience that we have in a political rallies itself, that is what children are always attracted to. And that is why they will tend to put on the t-shirts and follow the campaign trails. So to me there, I will not blame politicians, but I blame the parents who have the children at home and let them at least join the political rallies. In fact, it has gone far beyond just the trails itself. Even on the election day, I've realized that there are people less than 18 years old who are given voters cards. I was at a polling station where I looked at almost 5 different boys and girls. And I tell the people there that these people have not gotten to 18 years. And I wonder how they're able to also get their voters card. So honestly, there is some part where we need to also control the manner in which elections are done. And then parents have to be responsible to also safeguard the interests of their children in as much as elections are concerned.
What do you think would have been the proper mechanism to lay down in order to deal with irregularities such as what he has mentioned?
I believe the first grounds we'll be looking at, the first mode of information we should look at to prevent such issues. Of course, the issue of birth certificates, but then birth certificates can't be forged. So it is then up to the discretion of our agents to ensure the validity of the certificates they are being presented with. So, ensure that whoever is coming to the polls is, of course, above the age of voting and is qualified to vote. Yes, sir.
The EU election reports have highlighted that the Gambia social media, usage of social media contributed significantly to confusing the electorate to a larger extent. What is your view? What is your view on this?
Yes, I will actually say yes. That particular point of the EU's report, I've gone through the report. They've declared that the election was free, fair, and very much transparent. But there are also factors that were also responsible of the promotion of, should I say, disinformation. And that the media plays a huge role to that. Because I remember, even though it was spot counting, whereby polling agents have access to the results before even the IEC does. But then you realize that at some point, supporters will just go to Facebook and type that, okay, UDP have this number of votes in this particular poll. NPP have this number of votes. But if you look at the results that are released by the IEC, there is some discrepancies there. So that tells you that, of course, the media was a factor in promoting this information in as much as this election was concerned.
EU equally mentioned that in 2016, the Independent Electoral Commission of this country has earned respect of many. But along the way, the respect diminishes, due to the fact that we have almost about 21 political parties that presented their candidacy to contest. And then some eventually were dropped off. And then the matter was contested in the court of law, and the court says they have the legal, they have the requirement to contest back. Are you in support of that idea, that report of the EU election observers?
I would say so, but then I would not solely blame the IEC for such situations. Because, first of all, like you rightly mentioned, we had over 21 political parties. Now, quite a few of them were disqualified, but then their grounds for disqualification was not made known to the general public at large. So quite a few of us could not identify the exact reason why these individuals were disqualified. And individuals who felt that they had qualified took those issues to court, namely the candidate for the Citizens Alliance. And he won that case in court. In fact, the courts had to ask the IEC to, give him the remuneration of $200,000. And that quite reduced, the amount of faith people had in the IEC. But again, I would not blame the IEC for their decision. I would blame them instead for the lack of transparency in that particular part of the process. The population at large should have known why these individuals were disqualified from contesting the elections. And then we can make decisions for ourselves as to whether the IEC was right in its ruling or it wasn't.
In your position as a student as a political science student at the University of the Gambia, if you are to advise the Independent Electoral Commission on how to deal with how to do issues effectively with their stakeholders, what would be your advice?
Yes, the Independent Electoral Commission is an independent body that is at least provided by a particular act of law. And then that tells us that since it is the law that creates that particular Independent Electoral Commission, then they also must be guided with principles based on the laws of the country. And that is to say, referencing back from the fact that the IEC were asked to allow CA to also contest in the election by the court. But then they also had a contempt against the court of not going by the rulings of the court. So the advice I would want to say is, for us as a country that wants to excel and also move to the limelight of development, we must be guided based on the principles of the legal systems. We must not use our powers against what we have already set up as a country. And then again, we must understand the fact that in democracy, people have the right to establish parties. That is the multi-party system we have in the country here. So it is at their disposal now to also understand that in as much as we have multi-party system, they must not rule anything based on the favor of a single political party or two other parties. But they must look at the interests of the citizens. They must look at the rights of those people who want to contest in the elections. In as much as everything is leveled, they've also achieved that mandate to be candidates, then they should respect the dictates of our laws as a country.
IEC and people are supposed to, respect the dictates of the people of this country. So that, brings the end of this program. And then, what would be your final word to the viewers?
I would say, I would first of all like to commend the viewers and the Gambia at large for, conducting themselves well throughout the electoral process. Of course, we had a bit of failings, but these are things we can improve as we go on over time. And then I believe that would get to a point wherein not only will we be tolerant of each other, accepting of the results of the elections, we also accept that each and everybody has the right to vote, contest votes, and decide who they want to vote for. Thank you very much.
Simon, what will be your last word?
Thank you so much. First, I would want to say we are so much grateful to be invited to this particular platform to also express our views as to our perceptions to the recent election that we've had in the country. My conclusive statements would be done in 3 different folds. There will be an address to the citizens of this country, an address to the politicians of the country, and also an address to the winner or to the president of this particular country. Now, to the citizens, I want to say that we've passed through a long process. We have undergone a process whereby people had ideas, people had opinions that have a push and pull every single day. We've seen people who live as neighbors also have a different perceptions. But then we have to understand that elections will come and go. And then the nation of our country here will stay in as much as we are concerned. So we need to have that sense of tolerance. We need to accept what has been decided by people of the country. We need to accept that our votes have been counted and the greatest percentage of those votes have chosen a guy to at least lead us in the next 5 years. And therefore, we must be tolerant and we must accept that particular will of the country. Then to the politicians out there, being somebody who contested in the elections or someone who has not contested, in as much as you've put the country at heart, then you must have that sense of nationalism. You must have the sense of patriotism. You must not use your political power as a way to fuel, also to promote violence in this particular country. So you have people behind you, support them and make sure that they maintain the peace of this country. And then to the president that has been elected, President Adama Barrow, hopes have been high. Gambians have suffered for far too long. We've been freed from colonialism since 1965. Coming down to 2021, we have suffered. We've lost many women in our hospitals. Our education system is very much poor. The transport system is poor. The infrastructure is very much poor. Students at the university are suffering. And we have our hopes on him. So we must say that he is not supposed to be there to at least criticize the system, but be there to at least promote the development of this country. And most importantly, we've realized that the students of the UTG has recently went on a protest because of demands that we believe are genuine enough to the interest of the students. We've realized that the UTG faculty staff have also went on a sit-down strike for the fact that we have seen a very inconvenient university. So I believe that the president of this country will take up this particular tenure, not only to come and lead the country, but to revive the system that we have in the country, most especially the place where we trained our future leaders, the place where they're educated, and where we expect them to be trained to be the leaders that will save this country from the circles of poverty and the circles of underdevelopment. So thank you.
Thank you. That is the challenge to the President of the Republic of the Gambia. I was your host, Alkali Cham, until we come to your way again. Goodbye.